Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is July the 27th, 2015, and we're going to talk about a number of developments. Of course, the Syrian situation is definitely on the radar with the Turkish strikes and the question of the NATO meeting being called. The buffer zone issue is becoming ever more prominent. We're also going to talk about the North Carolina chicken farm ID policy that's coming out. We're also going to talk about a couple of other things as well. The Israelis and the Saudis now working together, talking about a potential attack on Iran in the wake of this Iranian nuclear deal. So we're going to try to get to all of that, and I hope that we'll have time to do so. For those of you who are just joining in for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Standard Time. Actually, I should say Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can catch the show on different times every night during the week, actually, because we are now on 7 nights a week. Rebroadcast of 6 of those nights is rebroadcast, and of course over at realitybitesradio.com as well, being rebroadcast. So again, the show is growing, and we thank you all for listening and for all your support and helping share information about the show and the information that comes from the show. Now, if you're interested in my work in terms of articles, then I would encourage you to go to activistpost.com and naturalblaze.com. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then you can go to BrandonTurbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all of the archives of this show. There's a books tab up there as well if you want to get in contact with me. There's a contact tab, there's a bio. All of that stuff is available there at the website. You can figure it out. It's pretty easy to navigate. And, of course, I also put up other things of interest on my website as well. So please keep checking BrandonTurbeville.com on a regular basis. Now, before we get into anything, last week we had a Twitter bomb, hashtag Free Joel Robinson, that had to do with the individual who was arrested and charged because the police, the DEA, went into his home, kicked in his door in the middle of the night, guns drawn, and he thought they were home intruders, so he shot one. And this guy was given 8 years in prison. They dropped the charges, the drug charges, and the reason they did that, obviously, was because he didn't have any drugs in the home, but they charged him with it anyway. And, of course, they took a plea deal to get this man behind bars for 8 years of his life for doing absolutely nothing wrong. So we had the Twitter bomb, hashtag Free Joel Robinson, and I want to personally thank each and every one of you, of the listeners who took part in that hashtag Free Joel Robinson Twitter storm, for every one of you who shared the article on Facebook, on Twitter, through your email feeds. Thank you for doing that. We tried to make a splash. I don't know how big of a splash we made, but we did something, right? That's what is important. When in doubt, do something. And we did. So congratulations to every one of you who actually send out that tweet or shared the article. That's the first step, right? We've taken the initiative, and we're moving in the right direction. So we did something. We fired a shot, and we're going to continue to try to do that. And hopefully, it will continue to build. Our effect will continue to build, and our strategy will continue to improve as well. So, that being said, let's start domestically first and talk about the North Carolina situation. There's an article by Heather Callahan, which is up at naturalblaze.com, which is entitled, "Is North Carolina Requiring Barcodes for Backyard Chicken Owners?" And the article goes into this issue in detail, and you should check it out if you can. Now, the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is using the Midwestern poultry avian flu outbreak as an opportunity to introduce new requirements for chicken farmers in North Carolina. And there's some new released rules, and they're in the case of a potential event. They're really causing some consternation between the smaller family farms and backyard chicken owners. They're trying to wonder just how close or how much these agricultural rules are going to apply to them, especially if a quarantine is declared. But we've got a report from Channel 9 WNCT News, which says, quote, all poultry owners are now required to register for a North Carolina Farm ID number regardless of the number of birds owned. This ID number will help the department to alert poultry owners about outbreaks. You see, they just care about alerting you. Owners can register online after August 1st. And that phrase, regardless of the number of birds owned, is what is got so much controversy going. Now, the NC Farm ID is what this is being called. But so what is this? If they have one or two chickens, does this mean they have the NC Farm ID? Well, apparently it does mean that. The Agricultural Department issued a press release, and they have a designated information area that's set up specifically for backyard chickens. This is what it says. In planning our response for highly pathogenic avian influenza, one problem we've come across is that we can't protect birds that we don't know exist, Mex said. We need to know where poultry are located so we can properly protect commercial and backyard flocks. And of course, what they mean by protect is to kill. That's what they mean by protect. They don't know the birds exist. Well, then I guess it's not a big ordeal, then, is it? If you don't know that they exist, then they don't reduce the amount of population that you already know exist, because you already know the other ones exist. Why are these such an issue? But given the government's previous treatment of backyard gardeners and family farms and chicken owners, the addition of these destructive practices should an outbreak be declared and general misunderstanding, mistreatment of independent growers, it's not too surprising that backyard and free-range chicken owners are concerned about getting somehow flagged in some type of database or something like that. But remember, we had the Rawsome Food raid, the Morningland dairy cheese raid. All this stuff has happened in the past. If it hadn't happened, if this is not what our governments and state governments, federal governments had done, then people might be a little more happy to cooperate with these people. But unfortunately, they've shown that you can't work with these agencies because they'll come in with a bunch of parasitical, limp-wristed bureaucrats backed up by a bunch of thuggish, moronic, steroid-head baboons coming in with guns to enforce the mandate of the limp-wristed bureaucrats. So this is how this stuff tends to work. And again, they're saying we can't protect birds that we don't know exist. Well, maybe the farmer doesn't want you to worry about protecting their birds. You ever thought about that? It's if you're forcing someone to allow you to protect them, then maybe you're not protecting them. And again, if you know for a fact that there's, according to your numbers, there's 100,000 birds in operation in North Carolina. Well, what's it going to matter if 1,000 birds die that are not on the rolls? Because you already know that you have 100,000 birds. It's not like that number has decreased, right? It would only be a problem if the 50,000 birds died and they didn't report it to the Ag Commission. So now they think they have 100,000, but they only have 50. That's not the issue here. And besides, these organizations and these operations are so small that the number of dead birds would be infinitesimal anyway. And besides, this is not where bird flu actually takes off. It's not small farmers and backyard chicken owners where bird flu and all of this type of stuff is, I guess, avian flu, yeah. So it's not where these small organizations are. where this avian flu takes off. It's the factory farms. And most of this avian flu is because of absolutely atrocious and filthy conditions. And it generally happens to people who have direct contact with them as well. But now, Heather Callahan's article, she mentions also the food and commerce crimp down continues, and what she's pointing out is that the sales of chickens were already limited earlier in this year, but there's apparently a cancellation of live bird sales this fall and winter. Now they're saying individual sales are still going to be allowed, but sellers, and that includes pet store owners, are being prompted to quarantine their chicks for 2 to 4 weeks to be in compliance with biosecurity rules. And there's also more rules coming out for farmers markets. So hope you don't like eggs, ladies and gentlemen. They're about to get much more expensive. Now, there's a requirement, also there's an additional requirement for poultry farmers to submit an HPAI, that's an avian flu outbreak plan, if they have 200 or more birds. Okay, the plan submission, which is required by September, is not required for those who are part of the National Poultry Improvement Plan. Now, again, these outbreaks were started and spread among large-scale farmers, these massive factory farms, in these horrific conditions. But free-range backyard chickens have been almost untouched by this epidemic. So it's not necessary. This is burdensome. This is an example of government overreach, of course. And it's ridiculous to lump free-range farmers in with big agricultural operations like Monsanto or Tyson or Smithfield or something like that. Absolutely ridiculous. But we know what's going to happen, don't we? We know what the agenda is. It's to crack down on the small farms and the family farms, the backyard chicken owners, so that only Tyson and Smithfield can have the ability to operate. Now, you can sign up. There's a free webinar, Practice Backyard Bird Biosecurity, Learn from the Experts. But these webinars and stuff are really geared toward picking on people who only have a couple of birds. And there's a egg farmer, Alvin Schlangen, who was targeted by local health departments and courts, very corrupt health departments and very corrupt courts, I should mention. He did an interview for Heather Callahan at Natural Blaze, and he says that basically when poultry catches avian flu, when the birds catch avian flu, they just fall over dead, and that domino effect comes from their living conditions and having thousands of them bunched up together, walking on other dead chickens and that sort of thing. So there is a Facebook page. It is No to NC Chicken Registration, and there is a petition to Agriculture Commissioner Steve Troxler, with is linked to in the article, so go check that out. And also go like that Facebook page and try to get in touch with people there. So I'd encourage you to do that. Now, we've got to move on to some more international news here. No, actually, I want to talk about the Obama gun thing. Yeah, so let's get into the gun thing. While we're on the topic of overreach and destruction of private property and civil liberty, civil rights, that type of thing, I would encourage people to go read my article, New Obama Initiative to Ban Guns for Some Social Security Recipients, Veterans, and Disabled. Long title, but basically, whenever you would think that Obama's war on the Second Amendment couldn't get any more insane, then Obama prances onto the stage to prove everyone wrong again. There is no level of absurdity and treachery that these people will not fall to. Now, it's not just a dance on the graves of mass shooting victims this time, or all of his pathetic whining about gun crime and the amount of time he's got to give regarding the issue. This is a push to ban a large number of Social Security benefits recipients from owning guns. So when Obama and his administration and the people behind it can't get its way by attacking gun owners head on, it just turns to extorting the elderly and the disabled that it holds hostage via their need to receive Social Security benefits. And these are benefits, I might add, that are owed to these people. Stop using the term entitlement, because it's not, or at least using it in the negative variation of the term entitlement, because it's not spoiled kids here. These are people who've paid into Social Security, and that's what they have coming to them. Now, the Obama administration is now pushing to prohibit Social Security benefit recipients from owning firearms if they, quote, lack the mental capacity to manage their own affairs, end quote. Now, that, at least according to the Los Angeles Times, is going to affect millions of people who have disability payments for one reason or another that are handled by other people. And the idea is to bring the Social Security Administration under the jurisdiction of laws that regulate who gets reported to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, and which is a database that was initially supposed to pertain to illegal immigrants, drug addicts, and felons, but now, as you can see, is being expanded. Now, you got to point out that with the exception of illegal immigrants, prohibiting American citizens who are not currently confined to a prison cell from owning firearms is itself entirely unconstitutional. This is just not to get too far off the topic here, but an individual that goes to prison and then comes out after they've served their time should have all of their rights restored back to them. All of them. All of them. If they are too dangerous to own a gun, if they are too dangerous to be around certain people and that type of thing, then they shouldn't be out. They shouldn't be out at all. So this is unconstitutional to begin with, the very root of this, to say that convicted felons can't have guns. Well, of course they can have guns. They have a Second Amendment. Now, there's a push to add the Social Security Administration and millions of Social Security recipients under this new policy to have their guns taken away. That's also unconstitutional, clearly. But it's really difficult to remember a time when there was a presidential administration that even pretended to be concerned about what the U.S. Constitution had to say about anything. I'm not entirely sure I remember hearing that from any president in my lifetime. But we have this large group of people within the Social Security system who, in the language of federal gun laws, are unable to manage their own affairs due to, quote, marked subnormal intelligence or mental illness, incompetency, condition, or disease, end quote. And the Los Angeles Times, it says there's no way to simply identify that one group, quote, but a strategy used by the Department of Veterans Affairs since the creation of the background check system is reporting anyone who has been declared incompetent to manage pension or disability payments and assigned a fiduciary. If Social Security, which has never participated in the background check system, uses the same standard as the VA, millions of its beneficiaries would be affected. About 4.2 million adults receive monthly benefits that are managed by representative payees. The move is part of a concerted effort by the Obama administration after the 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, to strengthen gun control, including by plugging holes in the background check system, end quotes. In other words, it's in run around the Constitution using policy and bureaucracy to get these ideas through and to get these policies through. Now, notice, for those of you who don't know what these representative payees are, these are generally for old people who, maybe they don't have the energy necessarily to go through all these, bill payments. Maybe they're they get stressed out by it, or it could be that a person's incompetent, they have Alzheimer's, or it could be something else. It could be very serious. It could be extremely simple. It could be just as much as the person doesn't want to have to deal with the day-to-day stuff, a little forgetful or something, or just doesn't want to be bothered with it. They pay a loved one, sometimes even to move in with them and take care of the day-to-day affairs, and that person gets a cut of the Social Security check. And, everybody wins. Sometimes that's how things are done. But Obama and his administration want to make sure that that doesn't happen, that if a person is in that situation, that they can't have a weapon to defend themselves. Because we all know that old people have been wheeling themselves around in wheelchairs, sniping off little kids, right? Yeah, it's been the elderly who are going out and committing mass shootings. It's always some 80-year-old man with a hunting rifle, a .22, who's going into churches and blowing people away, right? Of course not. It's stupid. The Obama administration and the Social Security administration have been working on this new policy, by the way, in secret. That's been something they've been working out. They told no one. They're just doing it. And when the media was finally informed about the issue and reported on it, the National Rifle Association and the National Council on Disability are both opposing the initiative, and they are opposing it for two different reasons. The NRA for obvious reasons, but the NCD is opposing it because of the fact that millions of disabled Americans will have their rights taken away as a result of this policy. So it doesn't just affect the elderly, by the way. It affects the disabled. So, again, many of the disabled people have the same situation where they have someone else coming over. Maybe they are in physical pain. They don't want to deal with the bills, so they hire a loved one to come over, clean up, pay the bills, make sure there's groceries there. There's shut-ins or something. And so that's how it works. But they're going to have their guns taken away. Now, I should mention that disabled veterans are a particularly high-risk category for having these Second Amendment violations turned on them as well, because of the high number of veterans who are disabled and who are in this type of situation. Now let's go overseas. Let's take a look at what's happening in the Middle East, because all of this is very important. We need to talk about the bombing, the Turkish-Syrian cross-border bombing first, because I want to make sure that I have time to get to this. On Thursday, the 23rd of July, we had Turkey scrambling fighter jets and launching a small amount of ground forces into Syrian territory after these so-called clashes with ISIS fighters on the Turkish-Syria border. Now, we're having to look at this and wonder whether or not this incident is really an omen of a coming attack on Syria's northern region, this border area between Turkey and Syria. And again, remember, this is July 26th when this show is being recorded. It's being broadcast on July 27th, but being recorded on July 26th. So there's a lot that can happen even in that span of time. Now, the Turkish military is claiming that a Turkish border unit was attacked by 5 ISIS fighters armed with a rocket launcher and Kalashnikovs. And the Turkish army unit reported that it had seized the weapons, killed one of the fighters, and destroyed 3 vehicles. This is what their statement says. It's, quote, "The Daesh terrorist who opened fire on our staff was killed and his ammunition was seized. 3 vehicles belonging to the Daesh terrorist have been severely damaged in a fire attack," end quote. So we have the Turkish Anadolu news agency, the Anadolu news agency reported that 1 Turkish soldier had been killed in the attack. The Turkish media also reported that we had F-16 fighter jets being scrambled into the Turkish border area in response to the incident. Now, the clashes came very soon after Turkey had announced a crackdown on ISIS across the country, as well as the Suruk ISIS bombing of that Kurdish demonstration there. after that demonstration bombing, the PKK actually responded by taking the lives of 2 Kurdish policemen, and then, there was greater chaos growing throughout that region, that southeastern region of Turkey. And we're seeing, this is threatening to throw the region back into the chaos that it was suffering years ago. So this is pretty dangerous. But military response from Turkey is concerning, not because they were attacking ISIS, which again, let's see the evidence for them attacking ISIS. A lot of this has to do with using ISIS as the bait to come in. This is more of the bait and the justification for military involvement here. We can't lose sight of what ISIS actually is. But we remember that Turkey has been rumored to be considering an attack on Syria for quite some time, and these plans were moving ahead over the last few months. The Huffington Post reported on April 12th of this year that the Turks and the Saudi Arabians are now in high-level talks regarding an agreement to form some type of military alliance to remove Assad from power. And the talks were being mediated by Qatar and have been known about for quite some time. In fact, they've been taking place since around February of 2015. When the meetings were finally made public to Western audiences, Obama chimed in to support them. This is what Obama had to say. We both, and he means Obama and the Emir of Qatar, are deeply concerned about the situation in Syria. We'll continue to support the moderate opposition there, whenever you can find one, I guess, and continue to believe that it will not be possible to fully stabilize that country until Mr. Assad, who has lost legitimacy in the country, is transitioned out. Funny, there will not be possible to fully stabilize that country. It was stabilized under Assad before you sent your monkeys in there to destroy it, wasn't it? How we get there, obviously, is a source of extraordinary challenge, and we shared ideas in terms of how that can be accomplished. I bet you did. Sources that were cited by the Huffington Post suggested that if the Turkey-Saudi Arabian talks go well, that the two countries would move forward with their plans regardless of whether or not there would be military support from the United States. But of course we know that there would be military support from the United States because there's not a war that has ever existed, there's not a war that exists that America will not somehow involve itself in if it didn't start the thing to begin with. Now, we have the question of the Kurds, right, and the Turks. We got to get into this a little bit. So the Turks generally support the removal of Assad, right, but they've stated publicly that they're unwilling to take a greater role in the Syrian situation without expanded intervention by Saudi Arabia, which is obviously Sunni Arab power. Turkey's leadership has criticized the U.S.-led coalition that's bombing Syrian infrastructure in Syria and Iraqi infrastructure in Iraq and engaging in death squad herding because they've said that the bombing has not gone after the Syrian regime. Well, it has, but what they're referring to is a direct bombing against all these military targets and start of a general war. Saudi Arabia recently demonstrated its willingness to intervene militarily in the region, of course, by attacking Yemen, right? The bombing campaign that's continuing to go on in Yemen. So this is clear that Saudi Arabia is willing to do something somewhere. The United States didn't participate directly in that, but they have provided logistical and intelligence support to that mission as well, so they're culpable. But there's been previous indications that Turkey and Saudi Arabia were discussing that cooperative effort in Syria, again, what I just mentioned. But we also had a March 2nd meeting between Turkish President Erdogan and Saudi Arabia's king, Abdulaziz Al Saud Salman, where they met in the capital of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and they announced an agreement to boost aid for one another's countries and to boost aid to the Syrian opposition, meaning the death squads, and broaden overall cooperation on defense and security matters. So this latest report that I just mentioned about the high-level talks between the Saudi Arabians and the Turks is no surprise, and it's also an indication of direct military participation against Assad by either country in the near future. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia have traditionally found themselves at odds, right? This is despite both of them cooperating with NATO, despite both of them cooperating with the United States, despite both of them cooperating with Israel. They still found themselves somewhat at odds. But this is, of course, becoming less of a factor. We see with these new talks and agreements that the Saudis and the Turks are now drawing closer to one another, if nothing else out of necessity, just the simple fact that they've really isolated themselves from a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. Now, we've got Grimm, Jones, and Schulberg of the Huffington Post, who wrote, quote, "Weeks after he met with the Saudi king, the Turkish leader signed a defense deal with Qatar to facilitate intelligence sharing, military cooperation, and possible deployment of Turkish and Qatari troops in one another's countries. This agreement builds upon a joint training deal the two countries signed in 2012 and positions Qatar well to mediate the discussions between Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Osman Teni Kolaturk, the main representative of the leading Turkish opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, on Turkey's Foreign Affairs Committee, is concerned that Turkish ground troops could soon be in Syria." I'll repeat that again. Osman Teni Kolaturk, the main representative of the leading Turkish opposition Republican People's Party on Turkey's Foreign Affairs Committee, is concerned that Turkish ground troops could soon be in Syria. He and other opposition members on the committee expressed this concern during official talks over the deal and later in a press conference after it was signed by the committee on March 2nd. According to the documents obtained by the World Post, the deal was then sent to the parliament and Erdogan to be signed. This deal between the Saudi Arabians and the Turks, the defense deal with Qatar sharing intelligence. Now, at the very least, there's been a clear intensification of death squad activity in northern Syria in the areas that are bordering Turkey. Now, this is obviously because the Turkish assistance, and the training, the arming, the funneling of jihadists into Syria through the borders, all of that is coming from Turkey, right? It's also because there's been this recent strengthening of the alliance between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, which has resulted in even further alliances between the proxy forces that are run by Turkey and by Saudi Arabia. Of course, there's some disagreement between even the proxy forces, these minor differences in religious ideology at the bottom levels, but this seems to be ironed out a little bit more. The only reason that these differing terrorist groups cooperate and don't behead one another at the lower levels again is because their external patrons are on the same page in pursuing regime change. In other words, what we have here in the general ranks of the death squad fighters on the ground inside Syria are a bunch of, what can we say? I don't want to say primitive because that's not necessarily primitive. They lack the self-preservation that one would need to even be primitive. The barbarians, I guess would be the term, barbarians, or just the monkey-like nature of these religious fanatics that simply go out and behead anyone who disagrees with them on any small issue. This idea is that they can't get along with one another. See, within their own groups, if one speaks out and decides, well, I'll wear a green shirt on Wednesday, and that's against one of their ridiculous interpretations of the Quran and Wahhabite religious ideology, then there's a fight. And this goes from the largest concept of Islam, the largest concept of social structure, down to the most minute levels of social structure as well. There's no independent thought allowed in these places, or allowed with these groups. So therefore they fight. The only reason that these savages would be able to survive with one another for this long and engage in some type of coordinated action is because there's someone above them giving them directions and requiring that they do work together, right? There's obviously top-down control here because these savages could not work together otherwise. It's the only reason that they haven't been cutting each other's heads off is because there's top-down control. Now, where's that top-down control? Is it Al-Qaeda? Well, in a way, yes, but it's from the United States. It's from NATO, and of course we know that now. That's been proven time and time again. Now, it's been widely reported that Erdogan and this new king had agreed to a de facto alliance over Syria when the Turkish president Erdogan visited the new Saudi king when he first became king. So what that means is essentially that pro-Muslim Brotherhood groups led by Turkey are fighting alongside the Wahhabist ones led by the Saudis. In other words, that these two countries that control two different proxy forces are now drawing their alliances closer together, therefore drawing the alliances of the proxy forces closer together. And of course there is some tension between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Saudi Arabians. We don't have time to go into that tonight, but that's becoming less of an issue from their perspective anyway. So the plans to invade Syria directly are clearly known by the Syrian government. And remember, it was an issue that was addressed by permanent Syrian representative to the UN, Bashar al-Jafari. In May 4th of this year, he said, quote, "Any serious attempt to occupy Aleppo will be met with open war with the party that it would resort to whether or not it would be met with open war with the party that would resort to whether Turkey or any other country." So, in other words, if they try to invade Syria, occupy Aleppo or something like that, then the Syrians are ready to engage in open war. He obviously stated that for a reason, and it's because he knows what is being planned. Now, in the last several weeks, we've had geopolitical alliances and talks that have begun to coalesce that might indicate that an attack on Syria, a direct military attack on Syria, is not only possible but probable in the near future. I mean, after all, the U.S. and NATO have been trying to gin up support for a direct assault on Syria since early on in the crisis, when it became apparent that the proxy armies of terrorists were not going to get the regime change goal accomplished. So the plans, at least from Turkey's side of the fence, appear to be twofold. The first is there's the plan to attack Syria that's been part of the NATO agenda from the moment the death squads were routed by Assad's forces. And Turkey has always been a major player in this regard in terms of shipping death squad fighters over into Syria. But the second purpose of Erdogan, at least, and his governing party, is that maintaining power, right? His party has been suffering a number of scandals and criticisms and failures over the last several months. And one of those miserable failures has been the policy toward Syria. And just like in any other country, a foreign war is more helpful than anything in diverting the attention of the local population away from the domestic population. Now, it's not the cause, but plunging support from the Turkish people is certainly a stick that has been used to prod Erdogan into further action. Now, we've got the Hürriyet Daily News, which is a Turkish news agency, reporting recently that Turkey has agreed to allow the United States to use the Incirlik Air Force Base that is in Ankara, so they could use that base for striking ISIS from the air. This move in itself has served to fuel a lot of suspicion that NATO is preparing for an attack on Syria in order to destroy Assad, or at the very least establish a buffer zone. Turkey is becoming increasingly destabilized because of this lack of support for the Islamist and foolish Erdogan and his policies, as well as an emboldened Kurdish community, because we have these Kurds in the southeastern part of Turkey who are becoming inspired by these more autonomous Kurds in Iraq and Syria, while simultaneously being repressed by the idiot Erdogan at home. So the Turkish government appears to be more and more nervous about the Kurds in the eastern provinces and the possibility that war could break out again. A buffer zone in northern Syria would not only weaken Assad, but it would also help curb the Kurdish problem from the problem from the point of view of the Turks. It would also help curb the growing Kurdish desire for autonomy. Now, it remains to be seen how far Turkey is going to take this latest military operation, but it's important to remember that in March of 2014 we had a YouTube video released which had the audio of Turkish intelligence chief Hakan Fidan, and as well as the former minister Ahmet Davutoglu and the deputy of chief military staff Yasar Güler, as other top Turkish officials. They were all discussing a possible attack on Syria. And the operation, if they were able to implement it, would have been publicly predicated on the basis of securing the tomb of Suleiman Shah. Prior to the release of the YouTube videos, about 2 weeks prior to that, the Turkish government had publicly threatened to respond to any attack on the tomb after a confrontation between death squad fighters and other so-called rebel groups in the area. The audio recording in that leaked video shows Foreign Minister Undersecretary Feridun Sinirlioglu as saying, quote, "An operation against ISIL has international legitimacy. We will define it as Al-Qaeda. There are no issues on the Al-Qaeda framework. When it comes to the Suleiman Shah tomb, it's about the protection of national soil." End quote. So Sinirlioglu was referring to the fact that Turkey would be able to invade Syria under the pretext of fighting ISIS and protecting Turkish soil, because that's an enclave there. But soon after the comments were made, we did see Turkey launch an incursion into Syrian territory on the basis of protecting the tomb from Al-Qaeda militants. So we don't know if the current operation that's going on right now is an isolated cross-border incident or whether it's going to turn into full-scale invasion. All of that remains to be seen, but it does not bode well in terms of an omen. Now, the operation that's taking place between the Turks and Syria, it appears that this is not just a one-time strike. This appears that it's going to be more long-lasting than that, because now the operation has been going on since, I believe, Thursday, which would have been the 24th, I believe. Now it's the 26th when I'm recording the show. It's been 2 days of military operations in Syria, on the Turkish-Syrian border. Turkey is now calling for a NATO meeting. This is an extraordinary step, actually. The official explanation here is that they want to discuss the escalating violence caused by the crisis in Syria. Well, okay, so the meeting is going to be held in Brussels on Tuesday. It was invoked under Article 4 of the NATO treaty, and that article essentially allows any of the organization's 28 members to request assistance when they consider their territorial integrity, the political independence, or security is threatened. So this is the article under which Turkey has called the meeting. We have a statement from NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying, quote, "Turkey requested the meeting in view of the seriousness of the situation after the heinous terrorist attacks in recent days, and also to inform allies of the measures it is taking. NATO allies follow developments very closely and stand in solidarity with Turkey." End quote. So, Turkey requested the meeting in view of the seriousness of the situation after the heinous terrorist attacks. Well, Turkey is the giant funnel in the Middle East. The Mediterranean, the Middle East, they are the giant funnel of terrorists. Once you funnel in hundreds of thousands, or well, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but at least tens of thousands of death squad terrorists, you might expect a terrorist attack on your soil occasionally. So this is these terrorist attacks, the crisis in Syria, is Turkey's own making, of course. But we're not going to go into that in detail because we've done that on this show many times in the past. So the Turks are continuing these airstrikes against, allegedly against the Islamic State, but it has widened its anti-terror campaign, and I put anti-terror campaign in quotes because Turkey is not anti-terror. Turkey is pro-terror. They are now bombing Kurdish fighters in Iraq. And who have the Kurdish fighters been fighting in Iraq? ISIS. So, Turkey is allegedly bombing ISIS at the same time that it's bombing the people who are fighting ISIS. Think about that. So this is what we have Sam Kiley, who is a Sky News foreign affairs editor. Sky News is just the European version of Fox. But this is what he's saying. Quote, "They are asking for surveillance aircraft to help with problems along the border. It is part of its argument for safe zones inside Syria along its border that would be policed by armed forces, presumably from NATO and members of the U.S.-led coalition." End quote. So they're looking for surveillance aircrafts. Okay, well, that's not so bad, is it? But then they say in the next line, it's safe zones. They're arguing for safe zones. That is much more than surveillance aircraft. That is war. That is direct war. That's not even proxy forces. That's war. That is the declaration of a no-fly zone, else you don't have a safe zone. And in order to enforce a no-fly zone, you have to have the Air Force in the air. And in order to make sure that the Syrian military does not go into that no-fly zone, you have to bomb the Air Force. This is what happened in Libya. This is Libya 2.0 if this goes through. So, this is Kiley also says, the other concern for NATO partners would be that this has been a period in which Kurdish separatist groups have been targeted by Turkish airstrikes, and these very same armed groups are working hand in glove with the U.S. coalition on the ground in Syria. That is going to cause friction, end quote. Well, will it cause friction? Because the Iraqi Kurds have been in the pocket, unfortunately, of NATO for some time. The Turks are worried about the Kurds straightening up their backs, really, and uniting between Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey, and establishing a Kurdistan, which Turkey does not want. They are concerned about that. And they're also protecting ISIS. Remember, too, that if the Kurds are fighting ISIS and the Turks are bombing the Kurds, then the Turks are acting as ISIS's air force once again. And it shows you that they're more worried about Kurdistan than they are about the Islamic State. Now, Article 4 has been invoked a number of times, and some of them by Turkey in 2003, and then in 2012 by Poland. Turkey in 2003 and 2012, and Poland in 2014. So this escalation in military activity by Turkey is very concerning nonetheless, and we have to look at the fact that there's going to be this meeting on Tuesday of NATO, and this is where we're going to see whether or not the question of a safe zone or no-fly zone is put to NATO. And if this is put to NATO, and if they agree to this request of a no-fly zone or a safe zone, then they are essentially introducing Libya 2.0. So this is extremely concerning. Now, if we have a few minutes here, I want to get into the Israeli-Saudi possibility of an attack on Iran. Let's try to get that in the next last segment here, last few minutes. I have been arguing on this show and in my article since the very beginning of this Iran nuclear deal that it's nothing more than theater, that we're going to see this used later on in a rush to war as evidence that the U.S. did everything in its power to avoid confrontation, and the Iranians simply wouldn't abide by the deal. In other words, this is theater and build up to the climax of war in Iran. Now, considering the years of propaganda surrounding Iran and its nuclear program, especially here in the U.S., it should be clear that the recent U.S.-Iran nuclear deal was just a show, essentially. It was a show. The U.S. NATO imperialist machine has made its desire to wage war on Iran explicit for some time. The only question is just how long this theater is going to last before that goal is actually realized. Now, considering the sizable reaction among warmongering fascists of the Republican Party, for instance, and the hysteria seeping from this mainstream Western press, the U.S. Congress, the Republicans, the conservatives, the Israeli lobby, Israel itself, and the Zionists here in the U.S. The predictions that any deal with Iran will eventually be sabotaged or repealed or violated and blamed on Iran or ultimately used to initiate some type of military confrontation are clearly capable of coming true in the very near future. Now, granted, Obama supporters and leftists across the U.S. are hailing this deal as a wonderful display of the desire for world peace and strides being taken for world peace, but you can't forget that for Obama supporters and many American leftists, any act by Obama, even war, even bombing, even slaughtering little children, is considered a wonderful display of the desire for world peace and strides for world peace. So there's nothing that's going to get past this cognitive dissonance that these people hold. Now, the West and its Western allied press has erupted in panic and horror that the solution to this phantom Iranian nuclear problem was anything short of total war. They want war. They made it clear. These outlets probably don't have long to wait. If the pulse of the media in Saudi Arabia and Israel can be taken as an accurate measure of the pulse of the governments there, we know that the pulse of the government here is ready to go. Now, if you look at the Israeli media, what you'll see, it's always in the front of the line to promote war against any country because they're always willing to fight to the last American in any type of confrontation. The Israeli media is already floating the idea that Israel might launch a military strike against Iran in the very near future. And these outlets are even going so far as to dissect what such an attack might look like and how it would play out and what would be necessary to do it successfully. We had an article by Yonah Jeremy Bob of the Jerusalem Post, and he was writing, his discussion is kind of typical of what's going on in the Israeli press right now. He doesn't call for war necessarily, but this is what he writes, and this is important because it's indicative of what the tone is like in the Israeli press. He says, quote, it's lengthy. Israel has until around mid-December to preemptively strike Iran's nuclear program before it gets even harder to justify legally than Tuesday's deal has already made it. Of course, right now diplomatically a strike seems unthinkable, but until mid-December, when the IAEA renders its final assessments of all past and present outstanding issues, as referred to in around the 150-page agreement, the UN will likely not have actually removed most sanctions. As long as UN sanctions are in place, Iran's history of violating the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, of UN resolutions and actions framing it as a violator, and of the failure of those actions to stop Iran's push for the bomb is still the narrative. Why does this matter? Some say that preemptive strikes are barred by international law from the outset, as only an armed attack activates the right of self-defense against an aggressor. Countries that have carried out preemptive strikes in the past, like the U.S. and Israel, largely base their actions on the concept that international law permits a preemptive strike to prevent an imminent attack, even if that attack is not yet in progress. Once preemptive strikes can be undertaken to block an imminent attack, broadening the definition of what is imminent to permit a strike even more in advance of a potential threat is less of a jump. This is especially true concerning nuclear weapons, which can essentially end the game if they are launched. All right, end quote. But he goes on to discuss how Israel might interpret or argue its case before the UN or against any condemnation of such preemptive strike, aggressive strike, by using these UN resolutions themselves. And this is what Bob writes, quote, The resolutions do not authorize a preemptive strike on Iran, nor does the current Iran deal. Far from it. But some argue that legally the reason that individual nations are supposed to hold off from preemptive strikes is that the UN is supposed to handle collective security issues so that individual nations do not need to. Some have argued that if the UN drops the ball persistently over a longer period in protecting an individual nation from a security issue, then there is more justification for that nation to take preemptive action in self-defense. There will likely be an initial UN resolution in the near future to set the stage for later sanctions removal. However, until UN sanctions are actually removed and Iran's violator status is reset by a second round of UN resolutions, likely around when the IAEA gives its report, Israel can still argue that Iran is a violator which the UN failed to stop, even according to its own standards. All of that changes once sanctions are removed and Iran is no longer a presumed violator. Also, until the second round of UN resolutions pass, there could be numerous instances of Iranian cheating or foot-dragging on specific obligations. According to the Iran deal, a joint commission vote of the US, UK, EU, France, and Germany can override Iran, Russia, and China to snap sanctions back on within 24 days of Iran being caught carrying out violations, such as nuclear activities that were undeclared. What if Iran gets caught, 24 days pass, and the 5 Western powers blink? If this occurs before the UN resolution, the Israeli argument would actually be stronger, because Iran would be an express violation of its most recent commitments along with past UN resolutions. Of course, the agreement views non-compliance as a reason to snap back sanctions, not for a sudden strike on Iran. But on the spectrum of legal justifiability, Israel would be better off making a preemptive strike than it would be after the UN resolution is passed. End quote. Now again, Bob doesn't call for military action against Iran in his article. The discussion, which is taking place all across the Israeli media, is telling, though, because the fact that the entire country seems to be engaged in so-called a debate about a proper Israeli reaction in a manner similar to the debate that took place in America during the insanity of the question of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, shows that the gears of war are both gaining speed and momentum. Because we have this sizable portion of Israel's population who's already supporting a strike on Iran. And we all know how debating war goes, right? The pro-war side usually wins because it has the side of the government and the media behind it. So but pay attention to what I just read, though. The frame-up of the question of war against Iran, which is basically that the Iranians are found to be in violation of the nuclear agreements before the UN resolution removes sanctions, and basically rebrand Iran as a nation that is not a nuclear violator. Before these violations, before the agreements can go into force, this is when the strike is supposed to happen. And the second, this ideal situation for Israel is that a violation before an official UN resolution. But the truth is that any violation, whether it's big, small, real, imagined, manufactured, it's almost always going to suffice for what they need. So what they would prefer, again, is a violation before the UN resolution that essentially rebrands Iran as a peaceful nation officially. But in the absence of that, any type of violation that they can interpret to their ends is going to be used, and that's clear enough. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. We'll probably pick up on this again next week, and of course, we're going to follow the Syrian situation closely. Thank you all for listening tonight. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.